Greetings, YouTube. I thought I'd get a video in while Mandarin was here. I'm reading a book at the moment on Atlantis, Imagining Atlantis, I believe is the name. And it's really about the mythology around Atlantis, the people that have tried to find it, the research that's been done, and the societal narrative around Atlantis more than Atlantis itself. But it has inspired me because I didn't know this, but Edward Casey, a famous psychic, predicted that Atlantis would return to the world in 1968. It didn't, or maybe it did. Maybe the Illuminati is hiding it from us. So I'm going to postulate an alternative timeline where in 1968, Atlantis does in fact return. And Atlantis returning does two things. First, it physically returns the isle to this planet. And the second, it returns psychic or psionic powers to Earth. Now, while I love the Pathfinder psionic rules done by Dream Scarred Press, I really do. I think it's the finest set of psionic rules I've ever read and one of the best spell point systems ever done. I don't think it would be appropriate for a modern campaign. It's too much like the D&D magic system. It's a little too fiddly, I think. I think Stars Without Number would be a good system to use for this concept, and one of the reasons is because the way they've pared down the psionic rules to base abilities, that you only get one per level, and then you can actually split your focus a little bit and pick up a second line of psionic training as you get higher in level, but still offering a lot of variety and usefulness to a psychic individual and to a party of adventurers. And I would pose some limits on psychics in the game. One is they cannot use electrical devices. If they touch an electrical device, the electrical device will simply not work as long as they are touching it. An electrical watch won't function. A computer won't function. Though you would be able to build mechanical interfaces that would let a person to use a computer so long as they were not directly touching the computer. So you'd have to have something between the user and the computer, so a mechanical keyboard that ran, switches and stuff that would allow them. You wouldn't actually have to be mechanical keyboard to a regular keyboard, just to mechanical switches that would allow them to operate the text and the mouse and things like that for a computer. So it would just be a little more difficult for them to do it. Not a lot of laptops in the psychic community, and they cannot use chemical explosives. So no firearms for them. They just won't work. If they're holding the object, it's not going to function. And in fact, if they were to pick up a live grenade, it wouldn't explode in their hand. It would explode when they dropped it. Be careful of that, but it wouldn't explode in their hand, which could open up some interesting tactical options, I think. So they can't use a lot of the common items of the everyday world. And even if they don't otherwise give off a sign of being psychic, the fact that they are kind of anachronistic in their use of technology could be a tell for those that want to know if someone is psionic or psychic. Or then again, they could just be wearing a fake watch to fool someone. And these traits hold on the island as well. So no electrical things work on the island, and no chemical explosives work there, so no gunpowder, no dynamite, no C4, none of that. So fires work, biological, electrical systems work, but that's it. And I'm going kind of with a classic Atlantis here. So it's going to be a completely artificial structure. It's going to be circular, and it's going to be comprised of 9 rings and a central hub. It's going to be fairly large. It's going to be 1,000 miles in diameter. Yes, I'm using miles because it's an anachronistic concept, and miles are an anachronistic measuring system. And each of these rings is 100 miles, approximately 100 miles wide, and there is a channel a mile wide between each of these rings. Each ring is broken by a smaller channel, which is a furlong wide, 660 feet, and 100 feet deep. So that's a fairly deep draft. So you could get, okay, we'll go with 100 yards, 300 feet. So 100 yards, 300 feet deep. So you can pretty much get any size ship you want to. Each of these furlong wide breaks in the ring, and they're at the cardinal point, literally at the cardinal points, when the island arrives, is bridged by an energy bridge, which can be turned off to let things that are tall through. So tall masted ships can be let through, and then the field turned back on. Unbeknownst to most of the people that go to Atlantis, these fields can also block off these at a moment's notice. The island does have some self-defense features built into it. The island is covered in all varieties of terrain. So it's got plains, and it's got desert areas, and it's got jungle areas, and mountains, though it does tend to be on the warmer side because it ends up showing up at the equator itself. So either ends of the island are going to be cooler than the center. But there's going to be an overall even temperature because the island rotates 1 degree per day. So every 360 days, it's gone around one complete revolution. No one knows why it does this, but it does that. It may be related to the fact that over time they've learned that the Atlanteans were sun worshippers, so maybe that's why. Speaking of the Atlanteans, there aren't any. When the island shows up, it is devoid of humanoid life of any kind. There are no sapient humans here. There are a lot of things left behind that have high levels of sentience, however. The Atlanteans were heavily into biotechnology, so they used a lot of biotech animals and plants to make their lives easier. They were also heavily into psionic items, so lots of psionic tools and weapons and gadgets were left behind, often crystal-based. So you could crap open the Atlantis stuff that's been out there if you want to. There's lots of biotech things, lots of stuff from video games would be very appropriate. Anime and manga have lots of things that are crystal-based. All of them would be very appropriate for a game like this. And of course, the Pathfinder system, Psionic Rules from Dreamscard Press, are full of them as well. They would have weapons that could be, crystal wands based, or they look like pistols. They're fueled by crystals. Their barrels are crystals. Shields or rings that make shield-like forces, or just general force fields that are worn in a belt or something like, or bracers. Things like this. Many of these items can only be used by a psionically active person. Some of them are generic enough that anyone can use them, like the defensive bracers anyone can use, or common gadgets that are lights, or ability to play audio crystals or audio videotapes are generic. And they did leave behind millions of audio crystals and video crystals behind, so we know what they looked like and they sound like. They also left millions of books, and the books are interesting because they all have metal pages, and all the books are in libraries. It seems that the Atlanteans did not keep personal books. They were all considered to be communal possessions, even if there were multiples of the same book in a library. And while anyone can go into a library even today, if someone attempts to leave, defensive installations activate, stun the person, and put the book back where it came from. So yes, taking a book out of here is going to be difficult, but not impossible. But you're definitely going to acquire the wrath of the crystal-powered automaton librarians. And there are automatons in this world that are crystal-powered, psionically powered, that are still doing their jobs as best they can. One of the things they have discovered is that in 1974, both the Soviets and the Americans had acquired enough air rifles and psionic weapons to actually have a battle over the island. When this happened, defensive installations popped up. Hundreds and hundreds of psionic and automatrons poured out of vaults from beneath the ground and slaughtered them all. Warfare on Atlantis ended very quickly. Now, it's 2017, so what's the world look like now after we have an Atlantis that has brought psionic powers back to the world? Did Elvis get a psychic surgeon that kept him healthy and alive, so he's still alive today, or he died at a ripe old age in 2005? How did it affect the political structures of the world? Did the Soviet Union last longer, or did it end sooner? What happened to Reaganomics? Did that happen? Did Margaret Thatcher have any power? People are exploring the island. They're discovering new things. Do they ever find any cryogenically suspended Atlanteans? One thing that people have noticed is that the Atlanteans were definitely human in every way appearance, They were less sexual dimorphism. They seemed to be the average of about 5'6", regardless of either sex. They had darker skin, so they looked very Northern African, and they had black hair, most often straight and worn long by pretty much everybody. And their roles were less sexually diverse than ours, so that gender seems to be less of an issue. Yes, I'm throwing my politics in here. That's what I can do. And they've noticed that after 2 generations of people that have been living and breeding on the island, that they're starting to look very Atlantean, that the children are looking less like their parents and more like the Atlanteans that came before them. Speaking of biological things, you can remove plants and animals from Atlantis and they'll thrive in other places. They just won't breed. And if you bring any animals or plants outside Atlantis onto the island, they will also thrive and they will not breed. The one exception is humans. The island seems to want to turn the humans into Atlanteans. And speaking of plants and animals, this is where you can go hog wild. Any kind of freaky thing you can imagine could be on Atlantis. Dinosaurs, aliens. You can pull stuff from Gamma World, Mutant Epoch, Star Trek, Star Wars, any fantasy game, mythology of our own world. It can be anything you can imagine could be on this island. Completely original constructions of your own when it comes to plants and animals, both quote-unquote natural plants and animals and ones that have been biologically engineered. Now, a lot of the island has gone fallow. This island has been unoccupied for almost 11,000 years. Plato was right. It did disappear 9,000 years prior to his age. And that day, the Atlanteans disappeared. And there are audio and video records that are right up to that moment, but then they just cut off. And there's nothing of the event itself. So people were busy, they weren't recording it when it happened, or at least no one's found any recordings, either audio or video, of what happened on that day. So the island's been fallow. One of the interesting things is none of the structures have been harmed. Now, some of the areas, they're like the gardens and things, some of them are still being maintained 11,000 years later by plants and by animals and by psionically powered automatons. But much of the island was left to go wild. And even though this was an artificial environment, they had created very natural biospheres, and so they were allowed to go wild. So they very much are wild now, 11,000 years of being on their own. But the buildings are unharmed. So you have lots of buildings that be covered with plants and vines and things on the outside, but themselves, the contents, at least where the plants and animals didn't get into the building, are just the way they were left. It's like the Atlanteans just disappeared like that. Items left exactly where they lay when they disappeared. And again, at this point, no one knows why. Now, because of the size of this, it's roughly the size of Nebraska. That's pretty darn big. It's like 785,000 square miles. So that's a lot of space to play with. And there aren't a lot of just general people. Most of the people who moved here were like the hippies, or some of the, maybe it could be fringe Amish group that moved here. There are hardcore Christians that are trying to prove that this is a tool of Satan, and they've actually tried to damage some of the mosaics they've found because they consider them to be obscene because they are sexual in nature. And they've damaged them, and the next day they were fine. Many of those Baptists ran screaming off the island the next day. Getting to the island can be a little problematic. 100 miles away from the island, electrical systems begin to fail, and they completely shut down at the 50-mile mark, which is also when the chemical inert nature kicks in at the 50-mile mark. So I guess you could be at 51 and fire a really large cannon and get it to land, and I think there are some cannons big enough to actually reach the island, but it would just drop a rock. It would drop a lump of metal because it would not explode upon impact. Not that it wouldn't damage something, but if it damages the building will be fine the next day. So you have to get in here, possibly by glider. I don't know how far a glider could go, but potentially a glider could be released at the 52 or 53 mile range and glide in, maybe. But mostly people come in through sailboats or through steamships, mostly coal-driven. So coal-driven steamships make a comeback in a way they haven't made a comeback in our world, because you can't have internal combustion engines, but they require electricity, which will stop functioning at the 50-mile mark. So maybe there's a Sargasso Sea of ships that tried to tried to get to the island, but failed because they didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. Maybe no one ever brought them out. So maybe there's some ships out there that could be themselves explored by intrepid adventurers, or maybe there's subs sunk beneath the ocean because of this. Now, the island itself is about a mile thick, so below the water line, it goes down about a mile, and the ground kind of tapers, the earth, the rocky understructure kind of tapers down to a point, roughly, kind of like underwater mountains, upside down. They're riddled with caves and passages, rife with sea life. And again, the sea life here could be anything you could conceivably imagine, and none of it can breed off the island. So there is no contamination as far as invasive species either off the island or on the island. They are pristine in nature. So you can bring your favorite dog or cat with you. They're just never going to breed. They'll live out their life happily and die on the island. So again, this is an idea I've come up with over a couple of days. I really haven't done much with the idea. I'm just kind of throwing it out there for people. I'm running long here. I apologize. And I wanted to make it today because Mandarin here, people love Mandarin. She's very popular. I'm convinced when she goes away, I'm going to lose half my subscribers. I want to hear what people think about Atlantis. Would you use an Atlantis like this, or would you want a more natural Atlantis? Because most maps of Atlantis show it as an island, a more conventional island. And some don't even place it in the middle of the Atlantic. Some places in all kinds of different parts of the world. Some place it even, like say America's Atlantis, and or it was it's in the Sahara Desert, or it was between Ireland and England. It was a land body that sunk when the oceans rose again. Oh, and speaking of oceans rising, Atlantis always stays exactly at sea level. So if the sea level goes up, so does Atlantis. It always is perfectly in line. And even though the rings do not touch each other in any way, shape, or form, they are perfectly level with each other. They move as one, and they never, ever get out of alignment. Something very powerful is controlling and powering Atlantis, but appears to be completely autonomous and has nothing to do with anyone else. Unless maybe there's a power somewhere in this place that is amongst all the cities and the towns and villages that were left by the Atlanteans. There's a lot to explore here, folks. There's a lot you could do with this place. It could be really interesting. And I would like to hear not only what do you think you'd do with it, but what do you think it would look like in 2017? And how do you think this might have an impact on our world to have psychic powers return and to have Atlantis show up again? Let's discuss all things Atlantean.